Hello, my name is Will McCollum, and this is my Liberating Act presentation for GSWS 201. This is the true meaning of transgender, a presentation on trans identities, vocabulary, and other information you may need to know as a trans ally. A bit of a disclaimer before I start. There will be talk of biological sex characteristics. This is purely for educational purposes and is not meant to be sexual in any sort of context. Before we get into the full presentation, I'm going to start with some basic vocabulary, or maybe not basic to you, but basic to me vocab and terminology that you need to know. So first of all, the whole subject of the presentation, transgender. What does transgender mean? What does being transgender mean? What is the definition? So the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines transgender as of, relating to, or being a person whose gender identity differs from the sex the person had or was identified as having at birth, or when someone's gender identity does not correspond with their assigned gender at birth. Non-binary falls under the trans umbrella. These are folks who do not identify as part of the gender binary, so that would be typically men and women or men and women. And then genderqueer and queer is kind of used as both interchangeable with transgender and non-binary, but genderqueer and queer have both been used in a derogatory sense, so you have to be very careful using those around anybody. Typically older transgender folks do not like being referred to as queer, or older LGBTQ folks in general, just because in the past it's definitely been used in a more derogatory sense. Most younger folks, so Gen Z, even millennials, you have to still be careful, but Gen Z kids and below, they have more often than not reclaimed the term queer, but I would still ask just in case. And then the word cisgender is a word for someone who identifies with their assigned gender at birth. And I've used assigned gender at birth a couple times already, so here we are. Your assigned gender at birth is the gender or sex marker on medical records and birth certificates. It is the gender you were raised or socialized as when you were growing up. So if you are a cisgender man, you are a man who has always had male as their gender or sex marker on your legal documents, and you were raised as a man growing up. So you would be assigned male at birth if that were your case. And then assigned female at birth would be people who had the female or F sex marker on their legal records, and they would have been raised as female, and women and whatnot. This does not always apply, since there are also intersex folks, but I will not be going in depth into that today, unfortunately, but there is some kind of technicalities around intersex people, around those terms especially. Some more need to know things. I will be using the terms transmasculine or transfeminine a few times. So going through either physical and or social transition through name or pronoun changes, hormone replacement therapy, gender presentation, or surgeries does not necessarily mean they are binary trans, could be non-binary or gender non-conforming. So just because somebody may be taking testosterone as part of their gender transition, that does not mean that they are a trans man. And I will go over all of the presentation and hormone replacement therapy and all of that in following slides. But also gender non-conforming is another word that is fairly common in transgender spaces. It is not adhering to typical gender roles, stereotypes, or presentation. This does not make them trans at all. So gender non-conforming folks would be drag queens, or people who just like to cross-dress for fun. Gender expression, however, is how one expresses their gender. This is done through clothes, hair, makeup, and other typically easy to fix physical attributes. So for examples, a cisgender woman, how she would express her gender would be through wearing makeup and dresses, and a cisgender man typically would be would wear a suit or a tie. Gender nonconforming folks would kind of subvert those expectations. So gender nonconforming men would wear dresses or makeup. And then transmasculine and transfeminine folks, their gender expression may be expressed through more androgynous looks, or like the gender nonconforming, they may completely subvert the expectations of their assigned gender at birth. And then a couple of other terms you may hear in transgender spaces. There's transmisogyny. Transmisogyny is a form of transphobic misogyny. That's what transmisogyny is kind of short for. And it is experienced specifically by trans feminine individuals, so trans women or people who are undergoing gender reassignment from male to female. And then cissexism is believing that cisgender people's identities are more valid than transgender people's. So for example, believing that a cisgender man's identity is more valid in the sense that he is a man than a transgender man. So you may think that a cisgender man's identity, that he is more of a man than a transgender man. A little bit about the transgender umbrella. So I've used that term already before. The transgender umbrella, so overall transgender is just the term for anybody whose gender identity does not agree with their assigned gender. And non-binary folks would fall under the transgender umbrella. Non-binary people might not identify as being transgender, but since they are still, since their gender identity does not agree with their assigned gender, they still fall under the transgender umbrella. So non-binary people are just people who do not fall on the gender binary, and the gender binary is men and women. There are binary trans people, so trans men and trans women. Trans men are people who were assigned female at birth and are transitioning to being male, and then trans women are assigned male at birth, transitioning to being female. There are a lot of different non-binary identities, and I've listed some of them here. I will not be going into all of those today. Again, I do not have a lot of time, but those are just a few examples of some non-binary identities. Let's talk a little bit about gender dysphoria. So gender dysphoria is feeling as though your assigned gender at birth does not match the one you identify with or the one you feel you must be. This can manifest in extreme anxiety and or discomfort in one's body. It can also manifest through depression. In children, it would be playing with toys typically associated with the opposite gender or having more friends of the opposite gender. This is not, the end-all be-all of gender dysphoria in children, but it is common in transgender kids. Gender euphoria. So you do not have to experience gender dysphoria in order to be transgender. You may, however, experience gender euphoria. So that would be feeling happy and comfortable in one's gender identity or expression. So when a transgender man dresses up in more masculine clothes and decides to present more masculine, he typically feels gender euphoria. And that goes the same way for people who are non-binary, who maybe want to present more masculine or more feminine, or maybe they want to present more androgynous. Again, it is really up to the person. Everybody's transition and gender dysphoria and or euphoria is completely different. Everyone's experience in their identity is different. Even cisgender people express their gender differently and feel happy when they express their gender in a specific way. The treatment for gender dysphoria, both in the past and in the present, is through transitioning. And we'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of transition. So there are 3 kinds of transitions. The first kind is social. This is kind of viewed as the easiest form and the most common form for adolescents and children. So the social transition would be a name change, pronoun change, and gender expression. So we talked about gender expression. It is maybe getting a different haircut, maybe getting some new clothes that matches what they want to express, or how they want to express their gender. Pronouns, we'll talk a little bit about pronouns in a second. Changing your name, however, a lot of trans kids like to choose a new name to go by. If you are a parent of a trans child and you feel a little bit sad that your kid wants to change their name, then maybe having a conversation with them about that, not trying to guilt them into keeping the name that you gave them, but having a conversation about why they want to change their name, listening to them, and then maybe offering that the two of you or three of you, if there's more than one parent or two parents in the household, if you and your child want to sit down and choose a new name for them together, that is a really good way to have all parties feel comfortable and safe and listened to in the interaction. But do not press a child to go by a name, or do not press a transgender person to go by a name that they don't want to, and do not try to guilt them out of changing their name. The second kind of transition is a legal transition. This would be through changing their name legally, or changing their gender and sex marker on identification, birth certificates, other legal documents. And then the third and the most misconstrued and misunderstood form of transition, and also the most talked about form of transition, is the medical transition. And this would include hormone replacement therapy, puberty blockers, and gender reassignment surgery. And we'll talk about all of these things here in a second. So let's first talk about pronouns. So changing somebody's pronouns is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time. You have to actively think about changing somebody's pronouns in your mind. The best way to go about this is by trying to specifically change the way you view them. So if you grew up with somebody who was assigned female at birth and you have only referred to her with the gendered pronouns she, her, and this person wants to go by, let's say, they, them pronouns, you should try to strip away the preconceived notion in your mind that this is a woman or this is a girl or anything like that, and try to kind of remove that gendered lens that you have placed on them. And that goes for any other pronouns. Common pronouns are gendered pronouns or non-gendered pronouns that you may hear. So she, her, he, him are the most common gendered pronouns. There are also non-gendered pronouns that have been used in the English language for many, many years. Shakespeare used they, them pronouns as a gender-neutral pronoun. So it has been in the English language for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but no. So they, them, and it, its are both non-gendered pronouns. They, them is more common than the it, its pronouns. And so those kind of four pronouns, the common pronouns, are the ones that are, they're common. And then there are such things as neopronouns. These are three examples of neopronouns that I have seen in and around queer and genderqueer and transgender spaces. So there are they, them, their pronouns, sie, zir pronouns, and fey, fair pronouns. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other options for neopronouns. I've seen people use things like eep, eeps pronouns, which is kind of cute in my opinion. But these are other options for people who may not want to use the common pronouns or may not feel comfortable with the common pronouns. Neopronouns are harder to learn because you are not used to using them. So talking to the person who uses neopronouns, the best way to go about it is just by asking, hey, could you give me a few examples of how you want me to use your pronouns in sentences? And then just practicing that will really help you get over any fear of messing it up. A lot of times, if you ask people with neopronouns or even the non-gendered pronouns that you may not be used to using, if you ask them to correct you, more often than not, they will, or they will do their best. And as long as you try to correct yourself as much as possible as well. If you mess up somebody's pronouns, just quickly correct yourself, maybe say a quick sorry, and move on. Do not go on a long spiel about how you're trying and all of that, because that can make the other person feel guilty a lot of the times. If you want to have a longer conversation with them about their pronouns, then that is a good idea. Again, do not try to guilt someone into using pronouns that they are not comfortable with. Do not try to, do not express grief in any way about anybody, whether that it be a friend, a family member, anything like that. Do not express any sort of grief of them changing their pronouns or gender expression or identity or anything like that, because that can cause issues with them. Talking about your grief, if you are a parent, would or should be done with other parents of transgender kids or with a therapist. And now we talk about hormone replacement therapy. Puberty blockers is the first that we'll talk about. Puberty blockers are used typically for adolescents or kids who have not started puberty or are just at the very beginning of puberty. Puberty blockers are administered through monthly or every few month injections or a yearly implant. These are not permanent. Puberty blockers do not cause any permanent changes. It's more like it postpones puberty rather than completely stops it forever and ever. You are not going to be prepubescent, or the child is not going to be prepubescent for the rest of their life. It is safe when used on a short-term basis, so it's not recommended more than just a few years. And puberty blockers are not only used as a gender-affirming treatment. It has been used to treat forms of cancer and endometriosis as well. And then we will actually talk about the hormones that people take to go through a gender transition. So the first would be testosterone. The most affordable and common form of administering testosterone is through injections, through weekly injections. Some changes, these are not all changes, include a deepened voice, libido is increased, there is enlargement of the clitoris, it is also referred to as bottom growth, muscle mass increase, and fat redistribution. Hormones do not change bone structure in any way, but it can change like face shape, just based off of how the fat in your face redistributes, as well as just around your body in general. And then with estrogen, the most common and affordable form of estrogen is through daily pills. And some of these changes include a body hair decrease, a muscle mass decrease, fat redistribution, just like testosterone, and then growth in breast tissue. There are a lot of different changes in general. Some of these are permanent, some of them are not. But typically people who go on HRT or start HRT take it for the rest of their life. Some people take breaks based off of cost, or maybe they just want to kind of slow down their transition. It is really up to the person and their doctor and any other factors into it. Again, everybody's transition is different. And then some gender-affirming surgeries. So we'll talk first about bottom surgery. Bottom surgery is the most misunderstood form of gender-affirming surgery. So we'll first talk about transfeminine. Transfeminine people typically go through a penile skin inversion vaginoplasty, or just simply a vaginoplasty. And that sounds very scary. The skin graft is optional, but a vaginoplasty is simply creating a vulva and vagina. And transmasculine folks will go through a phalloplasty. There is a skin graft included in a phalloplasty. The scars around with skin grafts for phalloplasty look just the same as any other skin graft scar. And a phalloplasty creates a penis and a urethra. Both vulva, vagina, penis, all of that are fully functional and have full feeling. most trans folks, or the majority of trans folks, do not get bottom surgery just because it is very painful. There's a lot of complications and kind of rules for recovery. And it's very, very, very expensive. There are still a lot of trans people that get bottom surgery, but from the statistics I've seen, most do not. The most common form of gender affirming surgery is top surgery. For trans feminine people, it would just be feminizing breast surgery. This could be breast augmentation, implants, anything like that, just to increase the breast size, and then change the shape of the chest or breasts, depending on how big the trans feminine person might want, or what shape they want, etc. Transmasculine individuals undergo a subcutaneous mastectomy or a reduction mammoplasty. So a reduction mammoplasty is just a breast reduction, a typical breast reduction, and then a subcutaneous mastectomy is a double mastectomy, but not quite the same as a mastectomy that a breast cancer patient may go through. A subcutaneous mastectomy is going to be more masculinization of the chest than anything else. It's still going to remove breast tissue, but it will leave just enough to create the illusion of pectoral muscles. And then it will decrease breast size because they're removing breast tissue, and will also change the shape of the chest or breasts, depending on if the transmasculine person still wants some breast or they don't want it at all. And just to reiterate for the umpteenth time, everybody's transition is different, and it is up to the transgender individual what they want to do with their transition. Some statistics. A lot of people wonder about regret with gender transitioning and whether or not people transition. Only 8% of people who undergo a medical transition detransition, and 62%, so over half of that 8%, begin transitioning again later, and that's according to the National Center for Transgender Equality. This was from the 2015 Transgender Survey. And then the suicide and depression rates in transgender individuals, according to the National Institutes of Health, and a lot of different statistics from the Trevor Project, which is a huge LGBTQ charity, as well as a lot of different sources match this. 82% of transgender people have considered suicide. Over half, between 52% and 56%, have attempted suicide. Suicidal ideation and tendencies are more common in transgender youth. So these are kids from early adolescence to early adulthood, to early young adulthood. Suicide and depression rates decrease dramatically when schools, parents, friends, other environmental factors are accepting, and these rates increase dramatically in Black, Indigenous, people of color. So those are your statistics. They're pretty sad. And these rates will increase in the next few years because of the amount of anti-LGBTQ and transgender legislation that is happening in the US right now. I recommend writing a letter to your Congress member and trying to convince them to not vote for anti-trans legislation. To those of you who are just watching because you are genuinely curious and want more information about trans issues and all of that, myself and all transgender people appreciate your effort. And then to any friends or family members who are watching this because I sent it to you, or I posted it on Facebook because I'm posting this on YouTube, thank you. for accepting me for who I am. I love and appreciate you immensely. This presentation means a lot to me and many transgender people because it allows for some information to be spread in an unbiased way, in a hopefully easy to understand way and easy to access way. This is honestly my way of coming out as well. So if you didn't know, thank you. I'm trans. Yeah. Thank you again. Bye-bye.